The fluorescent lights hummed overhead in the restoration department of the Chicago History Museum as Dr. Victoria Lang carefully positioned the large glass plate negative on her examination table. The photograph, part of a recently acquired collection from the estate of industrialist Theodore Mansfield, appeared to be a routine corporate group portrait from 1909. 23 men in dark suits stood arranged in 3 rows on the steps of what appeared to be a factory or office building, their faces bearing the serious expressions typical of early 20th century business photography. It would take Dr. Lang several hours of careful examination before she noticed the detail that would transform this seemingly ordinary image into one of the most disturbing artifacts in the museum's collection. Dr. Lang, a specialist in early American industrial photography, had been tasked with cataloging and preserving the Mansfield collection as part of the museum's ongoing effort to document Chicago's manufacturing history during the early 1900s. The collection contained hundreds of photographs depicting factory operations, business meetings, and corporate events from Mansfield Industries, a steel manufacturing company that had operated from 1895 to 1920 before being absorbed by a larger corporation during the post-war industrial consolidation. The group portrait in question had been labeled simply as Management Team Meeting, October 1909, in the estate's documentation, with no additional information about the circumstances of its creation or the individuals depicted. The photograph's technical quality was exceptional, showing the sharp detail and careful composition that characterized professional studio work of the period. Each face was clearly defined, every piece of clothing properly arranged, and the lighting was expertly managed to ensure that all subjects were equally visible. As Dr. Lang began her systematic examination of the photograph, she followed her standard procedure of documenting each individual figure for the museum's database. Working from left to right across the back row, she carefully noted details of clothing, posture, and facial features that would help future researchers identify the subjects and understand the social dynamics represented in the image. It was during this methodical documentation process that she made the discovery that would change everything. In the back row, positioned 4th from the left, stood a tall man with distinctive features, a prominent nose, deep-set eyes, and a scar running from his left temple to his jawline. His dark suit was well-tailored, and he wore a pocket watch chain that caught the light in the photograph. Dr. Lang noted these details carefully before moving on to document the remaining figures in the back row. It was when she reached the front row that her systematic examination revealed something impossible. There, seated 3rd from the right in the front row, was the same man. Not someone who resembled him, not a relative with similar features, but unmistakably the same individual with the identical scar, the same distinctive facial structure, and even the same pocket watch chain visible across his vest. The man appeared to be exactly the same age in both positions, ruling out the possibility that the photograph showed a father and son or other relatives who might share similar features. Dr. Lang's first instinct was to assume that she had made an error in her examination. Perhaps the lighting or angle had created the illusion of similarity between 2 different individuals. She repositioned the photograph under different lighting conditions and examined both figures through high-powered magnification. The comparison only confirmed her initial observation. The same man appeared twice in the group portrait, occupying different positions as if he had somehow been in 2 places simultaneously when the photograph was taken. The discovery prompted Dr. Lang to research the technical aspects of early 20th century photography, seeking an explanation for how the same person could appear twice in a single exposure. Double exposure techniques existed in 1909, but they typically created ghostly, translucent images that overlapped with the primary subjects. Both appearances of the mysterious man in the Mansfield photograph were solid and opaque, showing none of the visual characteristics associated with photographic manipulation of the period. Dr. Lang also considered the possibility that the photograph was a composite image created by combining multiple separate exposures, but careful examination revealed no evidence of the cutting and pasting techniques that would have been required for such manipulation using 1909 technology. The lighting, shadows, and perspective were consistent throughout the image, and there were no visible seam lines or tonal inconsistencies that would indicate composite construction. More puzzling still was the natural way both versions of the man interacted with their respective groups. In the back row, he stood with his hand resting on the shoulder of the man beside him, while in the front row, he sat with his arms crossed in a relaxed pose. Both positions appeared completely natural and integrated with the overall composition, showing none of the stiffness or awkward positioning that might result from photographic trickery. Determined to solve the mystery, Dr. Lang contacted the Mansfield family descendants to learn more about the photograph's history and the circumstances of its creation. Mrs. Eleanor Mansfield Powell, the industrialist's great-granddaughter, provided access to family records and business documents that shed new light on the mysterious group portrait and the individuals it depicted. According to the family documents, the photograph had been taken during a crucial period in Mansfield Industries' history, when the company was struggling with labor disputes and financial difficulties that threatened its survival. Theodore Mansfield had called the management meeting to address these challenges and to plan the company's response to increasing competition from larger steel manufacturers. The meeting had been photographed to document this important moment in the company's history. Mrs. Powell was able to identify most of the individuals in the photograph using family records and employee documentation from 1909. However, when Dr. Lang asked about the man who appeared twice in the image, Mrs. Powell's response added a new layer of mystery to the already puzzling situation. According to the family records, the man was Charles Whitmore, Theodore Mansfield's business partner and closest advisor, who had been instrumental in building the company's success during its early years. The disturbing detail that Mrs. Powell revealed was that Charles Whitmore had died 3 weeks before the management meeting was held. According to the family's private records, Whitmore had been found dead in his office on September 15, 1909, apparently having suffered a heart attack while working late one evening. His funeral had been held on September 18th, and the management meeting photographed in the group portrait had taken place on October 9th, more than 3 weeks after Whitmore's death. This revelation transformed the mysterious double appearance from a puzzling photographic anomaly into something far more disturbing. If the family records were accurate, then the group portrait showed a dead man appearing twice among the living members of the management team, as if his presence at the meeting had been so essential that death itself could not prevent his attendance. Dr. Lang requested access to additional family documents and business records that might provide more information about Charles Whitmore and the circumstances surrounding the photograph. What she discovered painted a picture of a man whose dedication to Mansfield Industries had bordered on obsession, and whose death had left the company in a precarious position that might have motivated supernatural intervention. Charles Whitmore had been Theodore Mansfield's partner since the company's founding in 1895, contributing both financial backing and business expertise that had been crucial to the company's early success. According to the business records, Whitmore had been deeply involved in every aspect of the company's operations, from strategic planning to daily management decisions. His sudden death had left Mansfield without his most trusted advisor at a time when the company faced its greatest challenges. The family documents also revealed that Whitmore had been working on a comprehensive plan to address the company's difficulties at the time of his death. This plan, found among his papers after his death, included detailed strategies for resolving labor disputes, securing additional financing, and restructuring operations to improve competitiveness. The plan was considered essential to the company's survival, but Whitmore had died before he could present it to the management team. More intriguingly, the family records included accounts from Theodore Mansfield and other company executives who claimed that Whitmore's presence continued to be felt in the company's offices after his death. Multiple witnesses reported sensing his presence during important meetings, finding documents and files arranged in ways that reflected his organizational methods, and receiving what they believed to be guidance from his spirit during crucial business decisions. These accounts suggested that Whitmore's commitment to the company had been so profound that his death had not ended his involvement in its affairs. The appearance of his image twice in the management meeting photograph might represent visual evidence of his continued participation in company business, manifesting in multiple forms to emphasize the importance of his ongoing guidance to the company's survival. Dr. Lang's investigation into Charles Whitmore's background revealed additional details that made his posthumous appearances even more significant. Whitmore had been a self-made businessman who had built his fortune through careful planning and meticulous attention to detail. His business philosophy emphasized the importance of being present for all important decisions, and he had been known for his ability to be in multiple places simultaneously through careful delegation and communication networks. The business records showed that Whitmore had developed an elaborate system for monitoring all aspects of the company's operations, using a network of trusted employees and carefully designed reporting procedures to ensure that he remained informed about every significant development. His sudden death had disrupted this system, leaving gaps in oversight and communication that threatened the company's ability to respond effectively to its challenges. The double appearance in the management meeting photograph might represent Whitmore's supernatural attempt to restore his comprehensive oversight of company operations. By manifesting in two positions simultaneously, his spirit could observe and influence the meeting from multiple perspectives, ensuring that his guidance reached all members of the management team, despite the barrier of death. Dr. Lang's research into the photographer, who had taken the group portrait, provided additional insights into the mysterious circumstances surrounding Whitmore's double appearance. The photograph had been taken by Marcus Steinberg, a prominent Chicago commercial photographer who specialized in corporate portraiture and industrial documentation. Steinberg's business records, preserved in the Chicago Photography Archive, included detailed notes about the Mansfield Industries session that revealed the unusual circumstances under which the photograph had been created. According to Steinberg's notes, the management meeting photograph had been taken under extremely difficult conditions that had required multiple attempts to achieve a satisfactory result. The photographer described sensing an unusual presence in the room during the session, along with technical difficulties that had prevented normal operation of his equipment. Multiple exposures had been ruined by unexplained lighting problems and equipment malfunctions that Steinberg could not explain based on his extensive professional experience. Most significantly, Steinberg's notes indicated that he had been aware of Charles Whitmore's death, but had been instructed by Theodore Mansfield to proceed with the photograph as if Whitmore were present at the meeting. Mansfield had insisted that Whitmore's continuing influence on the company made his inclusion in the group portrait appropriate, despite his physical absence due to death. Steinberg described feeling compelled to adjust his camera positioning and lighting setup multiple times during the session, as if accommodating additional subjects who were not visible to his naked eye. The final successful exposure had been achieved only after Steinberg followed these inexplicable compulsions to modify his technique in ways that violated his normal professional practices, but somehow resulted in the technically excellent photograph that Dr. Lang was now examining. The photographer's account suggested that the double appearance of Charles Whitmore had not been accidental, but had resulted from deliberate supernatural intervention during the photographic process. Whitmore's spirit had apparently been present at the management meeting and had influenced both the proceedings and their photographic documentation to ensure that his continued involvement in company affairs would be permanently recorded. Dr. Lang's investigation expanded to include research into other examples of posthumous appearances in early 20th century photography, seeking to determine whether the Mansfield Industries photograph represented an isolated incident or part of a broader pattern of supernatural manifestation in business and industrial contexts. Her research revealed several similar cases where deceased business leaders had apparently continued to participate in corporate affairs through various forms of supernatural intervention. One particularly compelling case involved the Hartwell Manufacturing Company of Detroit, where the company founder had died in 1907 but had continued to appear in board meeting minutes and corporate photographs until the company was sold in 1912. Witnesses reported that the deceased founder's spirit had been actively involved in important business decisions during this period, providing guidance that had helped the company navigate financial difficulties and maintain profitability despite challenging market conditions. Another case from the Pittsburgh steel industry documented the appearance of a deceased mill superintendent in multiple photographs taken at different locations within the same facility on the same day. The photographs showed the man overseeing various aspects of the mill's operations, despite having died in an industrial accident several months earlier. Workers reported that the deceased superintendent's presence had been particularly noticeable during safety inspections and quality control procedures, areas where his expertise had been most valued during his lifetime. The pattern of posthumous business involvement revealed by Dr. Lang's research suggested that the early 20th century industrial environment had created conditions that facilitated supernatural intervention by deceased business leaders who remained emotionally and professionally invested in their company's success. The rapid pace of industrial change and the personal stakes involved in business ownership might have provided sufficient motivation for consciousness survival and continued involvement in corporate affairs. Dr. Lang also discovered that the Mansfield Industries management meeting had been remarkably successful in achieving its intended goals, despite the unusual circumstances surrounding its documentation. The strategies discussed at the meeting had been implemented with extraordinary effectiveness, leading to the resolution of the company's labor disputes and a dramatic improvement in its financial position. Within 6 months of the meeting, Mansfield Industries had become one of the most profitable steel manufacturers in the Midwest. The company's turnaround was attributed by contemporary observers to the brilliant strategic planning that had emerged from the October 1909 management meeting. Business analysts noted that the decisions made at the meeting showed a level of insight and foresight that exceeded what might have been expected from the surviving management team, suggesting that they had received guidance from sources beyond their own experience and expertise. Theodore Mansfield's private correspondence from the period following the meeting included references to Charles Whitmore's continuing influence on company decisions. Mansfield wrote to family members about sensing Whitmore's presence during important business discussions and receiving what he believed to be advice from his deceased partner's spirit. These communications suggested that Whitmore's supernatural involvement in company affairs had continued well beyond the documented appearance in the group portrait. The success of Mansfield Industries following the October 1909 meeting provided circumstantial evidence that Whitmore's posthumous involvement had been genuinely beneficial to the company's operations. The strategies implemented after the meeting bore the hallmarks of Whitmore's analytical approach and business philosophy, suggesting that his spirit had indeed continued to provide the guidance and oversight that had been essential to the company's survival. Dr. Lang's technical analysis of the photograph using advanced digital enhancement techniques revealed additional evidence supporting the supernatural nature of Whitmore's double appearance. Spectroscopic analysis of the image showed that both versions of Whitmore emitted subtle light signatures that were different from those of the other subjects in the photograph. These signatures suggested that the images of Whitmore had been created through processes that differed from normal photographic exposure, possibly involving energy sources that were not present for the other subjects. Digital enhancement also revealed that both versions of Whitmore showed slight transparency effects that were not visible under normal examination. This transparency was consistent with spiritualist photography of the period, where deceased subjects often appeared as semi-materialized figures that were visible but not fully solid. The transparency effects were so subtle that they had not been detected during a century of normal viewing, but they provided additional evidence that Whitmore's appearances in the photograph represented supernatural manifestation rather than conventional photographic imagery. Most remarkably, digital analysis revealed that the two versions of Whitmore were engaged in what appeared to be purposeful interaction with different members of the management team. The back row Whitmore was positioned to observe the overall group dynamics and meeting proceedings, while the front row Whitmore was focused on specific individuals who held key positions in the company's organizational structure. This positioning suggested that Whitmore's spirit had been actively participating in the meeting, rather than simply appearing as a passive supernatural presence. The evidence of purposeful positioning and interaction provided strong support for the theory that Whitmore's posthumous appearances represented genuine consciousness survival and continued business involvement rather than mere photographic anomalies or wishful thinking on the part of grieving colleagues. The strategic nature of his dual positioning in the photograph reflected the same analytical thinking and comprehensive oversight that had characterized his approach to business during his lifetime. Dr. Lang's research into the subsequent history of Mansfield Industries revealed that the company had continued to experience unusual incidents that suggested ongoing supernatural involvement by Charles Whitmore's spirit. Employee records from the 1910s documented multiple reports of a mysterious figure who appeared in the company's offices during important meetings and critical decision-making sessions. This figure was consistently described as matching Charles Whitmore's appearance and was typically seen offering guidance or expressing approval or disapproval of proposed business strategies. The supernatural incidents had gradually decreased in frequency after 1915, coinciding with the company's establishment as a stable and profitable operation that no longer required the intensive oversight that had characterized the crisis period of 1909 to 1910. The pattern suggested that Whitmore's spirit had remained actively involved in company affairs only as long as his guidance was essential to the company's survival, withdrawing once the immediate crisis had been resolved and the company was operating successfully under its own management. The final documented appearance of Whitmore's spirit occurred in 1920, when Mansfield Industries was being acquired by United Steel Corporation. Employees reported seeing Whitmore's figure standing in Theodore Mansfield's office during the final negotiations, apparently overseeing the transition that would mark the end of the independent company he had helped to build. The acquisition was completed successfully, with terms that were highly favorable to the Mansfield family and employees, suggesting that Whitmore's final intervention had ensured that his life's work would be concluded on satisfactory terms. Dr. Lang's comprehensive analysis of the Mansfield Industries group portrait and its historical context provided compelling evidence for the reality of consciousness survival and posthumous business involvement in early 20th century American industry. The combination of photographic documentation, historical records, and witness testimony created a case study that challenged conventional understanding of death and consciousness while providing insights into the psychological and spiritual dimensions of business leadership and organizational commitment. The case also revealed the extent to which supernatural beliefs and experiences had been integrated into American business culture during the early 1900s, when the boundaries between scientific rationalism and spiritual belief remained fluid and permeable. Business leaders of the period appeared to have been more willing than their modern counterparts to acknowledge and utilize supernatural phenomena when such phenomena provided practical benefits to their organizations. Dr. Lang's findings were published in the Journal of American Industrial History, where they generated significant interest among scholars studying the cultural and psychological aspects of early 20th century business practices. While the supernatural implications of the research remained controversial, the documentation of spiritual beliefs and practices within the business community provided valuable insights into the mental world of industrial leaders during a crucial period of American economic development. The Mansfield Industries group portrait was eventually displayed in the Chicago History Museum's permanent exhibition on industrial history, accompanied by extensive documentation of the unusual circumstances surrounding its creation and the historical significance of Charles Whitmore's posthumous involvement in company affairs. The photograph served as a unique artifact that illustrated the complex relationship between rational business practices and supernatural beliefs in early American industrial culture. For Dr. Lang, the investigation of the mysterious group portrait represented a career-defining discovery that challenged her understanding of historical evidence and the nature of consciousness itself. The case demonstrated that conventional academic methods could be successfully applied to the study of supernatural phenomena when appropriate documentation and analytical techniques were employed, opening new possibilities for the scholarly investigation of spiritual beliefs and experiences in historical context. The double appearance of Charles Whitmore in the 1909 management meeting photograph remained as compelling evidence for consciousness survival and posthumous business involvement that provided a unique window into the spiritual dimensions of American industrial history. The image captured a moment when the boundaries between life and death had briefly dissolved to allow a deceased business leader to continue fulfilling his professional responsibilities through supernatural means. Powell reported that learning about Charles Whitmore's posthumous involvement in Mansfield Industries had provided the family with new appreciation for the spiritual dimensions of their business heritage. The knowledge that Whitmore's dedication had been so profound that it transcended death itself offered inspiration for current generations while connecting them with traditions of business leadership that extended beyond conventional understanding of professional commitment and organizational loyalty. The legacy of the Mansfield Industries case continued to influence research into consciousness survival and the relationship between spiritual beliefs and practical affairs in historical context. The case provided a model for the scholarly investigation of supernatural phenomena, while demonstrating that such phenomena could have genuine practical consequences that affected real people and organizations in measurable ways. The mysterious group portrait stood as testament to the possibility that human consciousness and commitment could transcend the apparent finality of death, allowing individuals to continue contributing to the causes and organizations they had served during their lifetimes. Charles Whitmore's double appearance in the photograph served as enduring evidence that love of work and dedication to shared goals might persist beyond the grave, watching over and guiding the enterprises that had given meaning and purpose to life itself. However, Dr. Lang's investigation was about to take a disturbing turn when she received a call from Detective Raymond Hayes of the Chicago Police Department's Cold Case Unit. Detective Hayes had been researching unsolved disappearances from the early 1900s when he encountered references to Charles Whitmore that raised troubling questions about the circumstances of his death and the true nature of his posthumous appearances at Mansfield Industries. According to Detective Hayes's research, Charles Whitmore's death in September 1909 had not been as straightforward as the family records suggested. While the official cause of death had been listed as heart failure, police reports from the period indicated that there had been suspicious circumstances surrounding Whitmore's death that had never been fully investigated. The detective had discovered evidence suggesting that Whitmore might have been murdered by business rivals who sought to destabilize Mansfield Industries during its period of financial vulnerability. The police files revealed that Whitmore had received several threatening letters in the weeks before his death, warning him to withdraw from certain business deals that were being contested by competing steel manufacturers. Whitmore had reported these threats to the police, but the investigation had been cursory and no arrests had been made. The sudden nature of his death, combined with the timing of ongoing business disputes, had raised suspicions among some investigators that foul play might have been involved. More disturbing was Detective Hayes's discovery that Charles Whitmore's death had been followed by a series of unexplained incidents that had affected the individuals who might have been responsible for his murder. 3 men who had been identified as potential suspects in Whitmore's death had themselves died under mysterious circumstances within 6 months of his passing, each apparently suffering from sudden heart failure, similar to Whitmore's own death. The first to die had been Marcus Brennan, a representative of United Steel Corporation who had been negotiating aggressively to acquire Mansfield Industries before Whitmore's death. Brennan had been found dead in his hotel room in November 1909, with no apparent cause of death other than sudden cardiac arrest. Hotel staff reported that Brennan had been heard arguing loudly with someone in his room shortly before his death, though no other person had been seen entering or leaving the room. The second death had occurred in December 1909, when James Crawford, a labor organizer who had been leading strikes against Mansfield Industries, was found dead in his office. Crawford had been a key figure in the labor disputes that were threatening the company's survival, and his death had coincided with the sudden resolution of the strike that had been damaging Mansfield's operations. Like Brennan, Crawford appeared to have died of sudden heart failure with no warning signs or underlying health conditions. The third death had been that of Henry Morrison, a lawyer who had been representing clients in lawsuits against Mansfield Industries. Morrison had died in January 1910, again from apparent heart failure, shortly after withdrawing from all legal actions against the company. His death had effectively ended the most serious legal challenges facing Mansfield Industries, clearing the way for the company's remarkable recovery during 1910. Detective Hayes's research suggested that these deaths might not have been coincidental, but could represent Charles Whitmore's supernatural revenge against those who had been responsible for his murder. The pattern of sudden cardiac deaths, affecting only individuals who had posed threats to Mansfield Industries, was too specific to be explained by natural causes, particularly given the timing and the apparent absence of underlying health conditions in the victims. The detective's investigation had also uncovered witness accounts from the period that described seeing Charles Whitmore's figure in the vicinity of each death. Multiple witnesses reported seeing a tall man with a distinctive facial scar near the locations where Brennan, Crawford and Morrison had died, always appearing shortly before the deaths occurred and vanishing without explanation when investigated. These sightings had been dismissed at the time as cases of mistaken identity or grief-induced hallucinations, particularly since Whitmore's death had been well publicized in Chicago business circles. However, the consistency of the descriptions and the timing of the appearances suggested that Whitmore's spirit might have been actively pursuing vengeance against those who had wronged him and threatened the company he had dedicated his life to building. Dr. Lang found herself confronting the possibility that Charles Whitmore's posthumous involvement in Mansfield Industries had not been limited to benevolent guidance and business oversight, but had also included active intervention against the company's enemies. The double appearance in the 1909 group portrait might represent not just evidence of consciousness survival, but documentation of a spirit that had returned from death with specific purposes that included both protection and retribution. The implications of this revelation transformed Dr. Lang's understanding of the photograph and its historical significance. Rather than simply documenting supernatural business involvement, the image might serve as evidence of a deceased individual's ability to pursue complex agendas that extended far beyond normal spiritual manifestation. Whitmore's spirit appeared to have been capable of coordinated action across multiple locations and situations, suggesting levels of consciousness survival and supernatural agency that exceeded anything previously documented. Dr. Lang contacted Dr. Marcus Webb, a criminologist at Northwestern University who specialized in historical crime patterns, to collaborate on analyzing the connection between Whitmore's death and the subsequent mysterious deaths of his potential enemies. Dr. Webb's expertise in criminal investigation techniques provided new perspectives on the evidence that Detective Hayes had uncovered. Dr. Webb's analysis of the death patterns revealed additional details that supported the theory of supernatural intervention. The timing of the deaths showed precise coordination with key developments in Mansfield Industries' business affairs, suggesting that Whitmore's spirit had been monitoring the company's situation and eliminating threats as they emerged. The deaths had occurred in exactly the sequence needed to resolve the company's most pressing problems, with each elimination clearing the way for the next phase of the company's recovery. More significantly, Dr. Webb discovered that each of the mysterious deaths had been preceded by reports of supernatural activity at the locations where they occurred. Hotel staff at the facility where Brennan died reported unexplained temperature drops and electrical disturbances in the days before his death. Crawford's office had been the site of similar phenomena, including reports of voices and footsteps when the building was supposed to be empty. Morrison's law office had experienced equipment failures and document disappearances that had disrupted his work on the Mansfield case before his death. The pattern of supernatural activity preceding each death suggested that Whitmore's spirit had been actively preparing for and orchestrating the eliminations, rather than simply appearing at the moment of death. The level of planning and coordination involved indicated that consciousness survival might allow for complex strategic thinking and long-term project management that extended well beyond simple manifestation or communication with the living. Dr. Webb's investigation also revealed that the mysterious deaths had not gone entirely unnoticed by law enforcement of the period. A detective named Patrick O'Brien had suspected connections between the deaths and had begun investigating the possibility of a serial killer who was targeting individuals associated with Mansfield Industries. However, O'Brien's investigation had been terminated when he himself began experiencing supernatural phenomena that convinced him he was dealing with forces beyond normal criminal activity. According to O'Brien's preserved case notes, discovered in the Chicago Police Archives, the detective had begun experiencing visits from Charles Whitmore's spirit after he started investigating the mysterious deaths. O'Brien described sensing Whitmore's presence during his investigations and receiving what he believed to be warnings about the dangers of pursuing the case further. The detective had ultimately closed the investigation and requested transfer to a different department, citing personal reasons that his notes revealed to be fear of supernatural retaliation. O'Brien's experience provided additional evidence that Whitmore's spirit had been actively monitoring and influencing events beyond the immediate scope of his revenge against business enemies. The spirit appeared to have been aware of all threats to the secrecy of his supernatural activities and had been willing to intervene to prevent exposure of his posthumous agenda. The discovery of O'Brien's case notes led Dr. Lang and Dr. Webb to search for additional documentation of law enforcement encounters with supernatural phenomena related to the Whitmore case. Their research revealed that several other police officers and investigators had experienced unexplained incidents while working on cases that involved Mansfield Industries or individuals associated with the company during the 1910-1915 period. These incidents ranged from equipment failures and communication disruptions to direct confrontations with what witnesses described as Whitmore's spirit. In each case, the supernatural encounters had resulted in the suspension or termination of investigations that might have revealed evidence of Whitmore's posthumous activities. The pattern suggested that Whitmore's spirit had been operating a comprehensive campaign to protect both Mansfield Industries and the secrecy of his own supernatural interventions. Dr. Lang's research into the broader implications of Whitmore's supernatural activities led her to investigate whether similar cases of posthumous revenge and business protection had occurred in other industrial contexts during the early 20th century. Her survey of historical records and newspaper accounts revealed that the period had indeed been marked by numerous cases of unexplained deaths affecting individuals who had posed threats to recently deceased business leaders. One particularly compelling case involved the Hartwell Mining Company of Colorado, where the death of company founder Samuel Hartwell in 1908 had been followed by a series of mysterious accidents that eliminated labor organizers and regulatory officials who had been threatening the company's operations. Witnesses reported seeing Hartwell's figure at the scenes of several accidents, leading to speculation that his spirit was actively protecting the company from its enemies. Another case from the California oil industry documented the apparent supernatural intervention of deceased petroleum executive Jonathan Rhodes, who had died in 1911, but whose spirit seemed to continue influencing events that affected Rhodes Petroleum Company. Competitors and regulatory officials who threatened the company during the 1912-1914 period experienced a pattern of business failures and personal misfortunes that suggested supernatural manipulation of events. The pattern of posthumous business protection revealed by Dr. Lang's research indicated that the early 20th century industrial environment had facilitated not only consciousness survival, but also active supernatural intervention in commercial and legal affairs. The combination of intense personal investment in business success and the violent competition that characterized the period might have created conditions that motivated and enabled deceased business leaders to continue protecting their enterprises through supernatural means. Dr. Lang also discovered that the phenomenon of posthumous business protection had not been limited to cases involving suspicious deaths or potential murder. Several documented cases involved business leaders who had died of natural causes, but whose spirits had subsequently intervened to protect their companies from various threats. These cases suggested that consciousness survival and supernatural intervention might be more common than generally recognized, occurring whenever deceased individuals possessed sufficient motivation and emotional attachment to worldly affairs. The research revealed that successful posthumous business intervention required specific conditions that included strong emotional connections to the enterprise, detailed knowledge of business operations, and personality characteristics that enabled effective decision-making and strategic planning. Business leaders who had been deeply involved in day-to-day operations and who had possessed strong analytical skills appeared to be more likely to achieve effective consciousness survival and supernatural intervention. Dr. Lang's analysis of Charles Whitmore's background confirmed that he had possessed all of the characteristics associated with successful posthumous business intervention. His deep involvement in Mansfield Industries operations, his analytical approach to business problems, and his strong emotional investment in the company's success had provided the foundation for his effective consciousness survival and supernatural activities. However, the research also revealed potential dangers associated with posthumous business intervention when deceased individuals had been victims of violence or had possessed vengeful personalities during their lifetimes. These cases showed that consciousness survival could perpetuate negative emotional patterns and destructive behaviors that might ultimately harm the very enterprises that the deceased individuals sought to protect. Dr. Webb's criminological analysis suggested that Charles Whitmore's supernatural revenge campaign had been successful in eliminating immediate threats to Mansfield Industries, but had also created long-term risks for the company by establishing patterns of supernatural intervention that might attract unwanted attention from law enforcement and regulatory authorities. The mysterious deaths associated with the company could have damaged its reputation and credibility if they had been more widely recognized and investigated. The potential negative consequences of supernatural business intervention prompted Dr. Lang to research whether Charles Whitmore's activities had ultimately benefited or harmed Mansfield Industries in the long term. Her analysis of the company's subsequent history revealed a complex pattern of benefits and costs that reflected the dual nature of Whitmore's posthumous involvement. On the positive side, Whitmore's supernatural interventions had clearly saved Mansfield Industries from bankruptcy and dissolution during its crisis period of 1909-1910. The elimination of key enemies and the guidance provided through spiritual manifestation had enabled the company to survive challenges that might otherwise have been insurmountable. The company's subsequent prosperity during the 1910s could be directly attributed to the foundation established through Whitmore's posthumous activities. However, the research also revealed that Mansfield Industries had struggled with ongoing supernatural incidents throughout the 1910s that had created operational difficulties and employee relations problems. Workers reported feeling uncomfortable in company facilities where Whitmore's spirit continued to manifest, leading to higher turnover rates and recruitment difficulties. The company's reputation for supernatural activity had also made it difficult to attract investors and business partners who were concerned about the stability and rationality of the organization. More seriously, the pattern of mysterious deaths associated with the company had created ongoing legal and regulatory scrutiny that had constrained business operations and limited growth opportunities. Government officials and law enforcement agencies had maintained heightened surveillance of Mansfield Industries throughout the 1910s, making it difficult for the company to pursue aggressive expansion strategies or controversial business practices. The long-term analysis suggested that while Whitmore's supernatural intervention had been essential for the company's immediate survival, it had also created lasting complications that had ultimately limited Mansfield Industries' potential for growth and development. The case illustrated the complex consequences that could result from posthumous business intervention, even when such intervention was motivated by genuine concern for the enterprise's welfare. Dr. Lang's final assessment of the Charles Whitmore case concluded that consciousness survival and supernatural intervention represented powerful but potentially dangerous phenomena that could have significant consequences for both individuals and organizations. The evidence strongly supported the reality of Whitmore's posthumous activities, but also demonstrated that such activities could create ethical and practical problems that required careful consideration. The case raised important questions about the nature of justice and revenge in cases where consciousness survival enabled deceased individuals to pursue agendas that extended beyond the normal boundaries of life and death. Whitmore's supernatural revenge against his potential murderers might have served justice in cases where conventional law enforcement had failed, but it also represented a form of vigilante action that operated outside normal legal and moral frameworks. The double appearance in the 1909 group portrait remained as compelling visual evidence of Whitmore's consciousness survival and supernatural business involvement, but the broader investigation had revealed that the photograph documented not just spiritual manifestation, but also the beginning of a complex supernatural campaign that had affected numerous individuals and organizations over several years. For Dr. Lang, the Whitmore case represented a profound challenge to conventional understanding of death, consciousness, and moral responsibility. The evidence for consciousness survival was overwhelming, but the implications suggested that such survival might involve capabilities and motivations that extended far beyond simple communication with the living or benevolent guidance of family members and associates. The case demonstrated that serious academic investigation of supernatural phenomena could reveal complex realities that challenged fundamental assumptions about the nature of existence and moral agency. The methodological approaches developed for the Whitmore investigation provided models for future research into consciousness survival and supernatural intervention that could advance understanding of these phenomena, while maintaining appropriate scholarly rigor and objectivity. The legacy of the Mansfield Industries group portrait continued to influence research into posthumous business involvement and the relationship between consciousness survival and worldly affairs. The photograph served as a unique historical document that captured not just a moment of supernatural manifestation, but also the beginning of a series of events that had transformed understanding of the possibilities and dangers associated with consciousness survival. Mrs. Powell reported that learning about the full extent of Charles Whitmore's posthumous activities had provided the family with a more complex understanding of their business heritage, revealing both the benefits and the costs associated with supernatural intervention in commercial affairs. The knowledge that Whitmore's dedication had extended to active protection of the company through supernatural means offered appreciation for his commitment, while also raising questions about the ethical implications of posthumous revenge and intervention. The Charles Whitmore case stood as one of the most thoroughly documented examples of consciousness survival and supernatural intervention in business affairs, providing evidence that challenged conventional understanding of death while revealing the complex moral and practical issues that could arise when deceased individuals maintained active involvement in worldly affairs through supernatural means. The mysterious double appearance in the 1909 group portrait remained as enduring testimony to the possibility that human consciousness could transcend death while retaining the capacity for complex planning, strategic thinking, and coordinated action across multiple domains of activity. Whitmore's presence in two positions within the same photograph served as visual evidence that consciousness survival might involve capabilities that exceeded normal understanding of spiritual manifestation and posthumous communication. The investigation into Charles Whitmore's supernatural activities had attracted the attention of the International Society for Psychical Research, whose representatives contacted Dr. Lang to propose a comprehensive study of the phenomena associated with the Mansfield Industries case. Dr. Edmund Blackwood, the Society's lead investigator for cases involving consciousness survival, arrived in Chicago with a team of specialists equipped to conduct the most thorough examination of supernatural business intervention ever attempted. Dr. Blackwood's team included experts in paranormal investigation, historical research, psychological analysis, and electromagnetic field detection, who brought both scientific rigor and extensive experience with supernatural phenomena to their examination of the Whitmore case. Their investigation would reveal additional layers of complexity in Whitmore's posthumous activities, while providing new insights into the mechanisms underlying consciousness survival and supernatural intervention. The team's initial examination of the Mansfield Industries facilities revealed that Charles Whitmore's supernatural presence had not been limited to specific dramatic interventions, but had involved ongoing monitoring and influence over company operations throughout the 1910s and into the 1920s. Electromagnetic readings taken throughout the former Mansfield offices showed persistent energy signatures that were consistent with spiritual manifestation, suggesting that Whitmore's consciousness had maintained a permanent presence in the locations where he had worked during his lifetime. Temperature measurements revealed localized cold spots that corresponded with areas where Whitmore had maintained his office and conducted important business meetings. These cold spots showed fluctuations that appeared to correlate with documented historical events affecting the company, suggesting that Whitmore's spiritual energy had responded to changing circumstances and continued threats to the organization he had dedicated his existence to protecting. Most remarkably, the investigation team discovered that Whitmore's supernatural presence had been documented through more than just the famous group portrait and witness accounts. A thorough search of Mansfield Industries' archived business records revealed dozens of photographs taken during the 1910s and 1920s that showed anomalous figures matching Whitmore's description, appearing in backgrounds and margins of images that had been intended to document routine business activities. These additional photographic appearances followed a consistent pattern that supported the theory of ongoing supernatural oversight rather than random spiritual manifestation. Whitmore's figure appeared most frequently in photographs taken during important business meetings, contract negotiations, and crisis management sessions when his expertise and guidance would have been most valuable to company operations. The photographic evidence also revealed that Whitmore's supernatural manifestations had evolved and adapted over time, showing increasing sophistication in his ability to influence events and communicate with living company personnel. Early appearances from 1910-1912 showed relatively passive observation, while later images from the 1920s depicted more active participation in business discussions and decision-making processes. Dr. Blackwood's analysis of the photographic sequence revealed that Whitmore had been learning and developing his supernatural capabilities throughout the years following his death, acquiring new skills for influencing physical events and communicating with living individuals. This progression suggested that consciousness survival involved not static preservation of personality, but continued growth and adaptation that allowed deceased individuals to become more effective in their posthumous activities. The investigation team also discovered evidence that Charles Whitmore's supernatural activities had extended beyond protection of Mansfield Industries to include broader influence over Chicago's industrial development during the early 20th century. Business records from other companies showed patterns of unexplained successes and failures that correlated with their relationships to Mansfield Industries, suggesting that Whitmore had been manipulating competitive dynamics across the entire steel manufacturing sector. Companies that had cooperated with Mansfield Industries during the crisis period of 1909-1910 had subsequently experienced unusual prosperity and business growth that could not be explained by normal market factors. Conversely, companies that had attempted to exploit Mansfield's vulnerabilities had encountered mysterious setbacks and operational difficulties that had prevented them from capitalizing on their competitors' temporary weakness. The pattern of industry-wide influence revealed by the investigation suggested that Whitmore's supernatural intervention had been far more extensive than previously recognized, affecting not just individual enemies, but entire competitive networks that threatened his company's interests. The scope of his posthumous activities indicated levels of supernatural capability that challenged conventional understanding of spiritual manifestation and consciousness survival. Dr. Sarah Mitchell, a parapsychologist specializing in cases of persistent spiritual manifestation, conducted interviews with elderly former Mansfield employees who had worked at the company during the period of Whitmore's supernatural activity. These interviews revealed a wealth of first-hand accounts that provided intimate details about Whitmore's posthumous involvement in daily business operations. The former employees described a work environment where Whitmore's spiritual presence had become an accepted and valued part of company culture. Workers reported receiving guidance and assistance from Whitmore's spirit during difficult projects, experiencing his presence as a benevolent force that helped them solve problems and avoid mistakes that could have damaged company operations. Several interviewees described specific incidents where Whitmore's spirit had prevented industrial accidents by warning workers about dangerous conditions or equipment failures before they could cause harm. These interventions had saved lives and prevented costly damage to company facilities, demonstrating that Whitmore's posthumous activities had included protective functions that extended beyond business strategy to encompass worker safety and operational security. The employee accounts also revealed that Whitmore's spiritual communications had become increasingly sophisticated over time, evolving from simple warning signals and environmental manipulations to more complex forms of information transfer that allowed him to convey detailed technical knowledge and strategic insights to living company personnel. By the late 1910s, several employees reported having detailed conversations with Whitmore's spirit about technical improvements and business strategies that had subsequently proven highly successful when implemented. These communications had occurred through various means, including direct verbal contact, written messages that appeared mysteriously, and shared dreams or visions that provided specific information about company operations. The progression from simple manifestation to complex communication demonstrated that consciousness survival could involve continued learning and development that enhanced deceased individuals' ability to interact with the physical world and influence events in increasingly sophisticated ways. Whitmore's case suggested that spiritual evolution might continue beyond death, allowing consciousness to acquire new capabilities and expand its range of influence over time. Dr. Robert Hayes, a historian specializing in American industrial development, contributed analysis of the broader economic impact of Whitmore's supernatural interventions. His research revealed that Mansfield Industries' survival and success during the crisis period of 1909-1910 had had significant ripple effects throughout Chicago's industrial economy, influencing employment patterns, investment flows, and technological development in ways that had shaped the city's economic growth for decades. The preservation of Mansfield Industries through supernatural intervention had maintained competition in the steel manufacturing sector that might otherwise have been dominated by larger corporations with less innovative approaches to production and worker relations. Whitmore's posthumous guidance had enabled Mansfield to develop advanced manufacturing techniques and progressive labor policies that had influenced industry standards throughout the Midwest. Dr. Hayes's analysis suggested that supernatural intervention in business affairs could have measurable economic consequences that extended far beyond the immediate companies involved. Whitmore's posthumous activities had affected thousands of workers, investors, and consumers whose lives had been influenced by the continued existence and success of Mansfield Industries during a crucial period of American industrial development. The economic impact analysis revealed that consciousness survival and supernatural intervention could play significant roles in historical development when deceased individuals possessed sufficient knowledge and motivation to influence events that affected large numbers of people. Whitmore's case demonstrated that spiritual manifestation could have practical consequences that shaped economic and social conditions for entire communities and regions. The investigation team's research into similar cases of supernatural business intervention revealed that the phenomenon had been more widespread during the early 20th century than previously recognized. Archives throughout the United States contained evidence of deceased business leaders who had continued to influence company operations through various forms of spiritual manifestation, suggesting that consciousness survival in commercial contexts had been a significant but largely unrecognized factor in American economic development. The pattern of supernatural business intervention appeared to be associated with periods of rapid economic change and intense competition when business leaders faced existential threats to enterprises they had invested their lives in building. The combination of emotional attachment, detailed knowledge, and desperate circumstances seemed to create optimal conditions for consciousness survival and effective posthumous intervention. Dr. Elizabeth Warner, a cultural anthropologist studying beliefs about death and afterlife in early 20th century America, contributed analysis of the social and cultural factors that had facilitated acceptance of supernatural business intervention during the period when Whitmore's activities occurred. Her research revealed that American business culture of the early 1900s had been more receptive to spiritual beliefs and supernatural explanations than later generations would become. The period was characterized by a cultural environment where scientific rationalism coexisted with spiritual beliefs in ways that allowed business leaders to acknowledge and utilize supernatural phenomena without compromising their professional credibility. Successful entrepreneurs were expected to use all available resources to advance their enterprises, including spiritual guidance and supernatural assistance when such resources were available and effective. Dr. Warner's analysis showed that the gradual decline of supernatural business intervention after 1920 had coincided with cultural changes that made spiritual beliefs less acceptable in professional contexts. The increasing emphasis on scientific management and rational decision-making had created business environments where supernatural phenomena were dismissed or ignored rather than integrated into organizational operations. The cultural shift had effectively ended the period when consciousness survival could be successfully utilized for business purposes, forcing deceased individuals to find other means of influencing worldly affairs or to withdraw from active involvement in physical realm activities. Whitmore's own supernatural activities had declined after 1920, possibly reflecting his recognition that changing cultural conditions made his interventions less welcome and effective. The investigation team's final report documented the most comprehensive case study of consciousness, survival, and supernatural business intervention ever assembled, providing evidence that challenged fundamental assumptions about the nature of death and consciousness while revealing the complex practical and ethical issues associated with posthumous intervention in worldly affairs. The report concluded that consciousness survival was not only possible, but could involve capabilities for learning, adaptation, and complex action that exceeded normal understanding of spiritual manifestation. The evidence from the Whitmore case suggested that deceased individuals could maintain active involvement in physical realm affairs for extended periods when they possessed sufficient motivation and appropriate circumstances. However, the report also emphasized the potential dangers and ethical complications associated with supernatural intervention, particularly when deceased individuals pursued agendas that involved revenge, manipulation, or interference with normal legal and social processes. The Whitmore case demonstrated that consciousness survival could perpetuate negative behavioral patterns and create ongoing problems for living individuals and organizations. The final assessment recommended continued research into consciousness survival phenomena, while emphasizing the need for careful consideration of the ethical and practical implications of supernatural intervention in human affairs. The evidence for consciousness survival was compelling, but the responsibilities and limitations that should govern posthumous activities remained unclear and required further investigation. Dr. Lang's role in initiating and coordinating the comprehensive investigation of the Whitmore case established her as a leading authority on consciousness survival research and supernatural manifestation in historical contexts. Her methodological approaches and analytical frameworks provided models for future investigations, while her discoveries contributed fundamental insights to understanding of death, consciousness, and the possibility of existence beyond physical life. The Mansfield Industries Group portrait remained on permanent display at the Chicago History Museum, accompanied by extensive documentation of the investigation and its findings. The photograph continued to serve as compelling visual evidence for consciousness survival, while providing a focal point for ongoing research into the phenomena associated with posthumous intervention in worldly affairs. For visitors to the museum, the mysterious double appearance of Charles Whitmore served as a powerful reminder that death might not represent the absolute end of human consciousness and agency. The photograph offered tangible evidence that love, dedication, and commitment could transcend the apparent finality of physical death, allowing individuals to continue contributing to causes and relationships that had given meaning to their lives. The legacy of the Whitmore investigation continued to influence research into consciousness survival and spiritual manifestation, providing methodological frameworks and evidential standards that advanced scholarly understanding of these phenomena while maintaining appropriate scientific rigor and objectivity. The case demonstrated that supernatural claims could be subjected to systematic investigation that yielded valuable insights into the nature of consciousness and its relationship to physical existence. The mysterious group portrait stood as enduring testimony to the possibility that human consciousness possessed capabilities and dimensions that transcended conventional understanding of life and death. Charles Whitmore's double appearance in the photograph served as visual proof that dedication and love could survive physical death while retaining the capacity for complex thought, strategic planning, and effective action in the world of the living.